All right. Good morning, guys. What I want to talk about over the next 30 minutes is cryptography as we know it, and what the recent advancements in quantum technology mean for cryptography. So, three different topics I'll be covering. Firstly, a little bit of a view at quantum computing, and then I'll talk about the impact that has on cryptography, and then finally, what the post-quantum future looks like as we sit here right now. So, kicking it off with quantum technology, right? So quantum technology is nothing new. We've been building applications of quantum technology since the 1930s, 1940s, right? So there are many things, many technology developments today that we utilize, things like your solar panels, LEDs, lasers, MRI systems, and transistors that exploit the properties of quantum mechanics, right? Now, you could consider that to be the first generation of quantum technology. Now, first generation in the sense that the properties that it exploits are those that are related to ensembles of particles, right? Groups of particles and quantum effects on these groups. Now, where we are today, we're actually taking it a step further, right? Where we're actually exploiting the capabilities of individual quantum systems. So a single photon, a single electron. And there are quantum properties like superposition, entanglement, and so on that come into play when we start looking at these individual quantum systems. So what that enables is things like quantum computing, quantum communications, quantum sensing, many other applications of that. So the one that's of interest to us today, at least from a cryptography perspective, is quantum computing, right? Now, before I talk about that, there are some key elements of quantum technology 2.0 that I just wanted to go through briefly. Now, the first one is the concept of a qubit. A qubit is basically a short form for a quantum bit, and it's you could say it's the counterpart to the bit, the binary digit that we are all very familiar with. So in today's classical compute world, we use bits to store digital information. In the quantum world, we have the qubit that stores that digital information. Now, what is really different in the quantum world is that the qubits can be said to be in a state of what we call superposition. That is, they can exist in multiple states simultaneously. Now, extrapolating it to things that are beyond a binary kind of system, that means it can be in all states, 0, 1, anything in between. But in a binary system, they can be both 0 and 1 at the same time. Now, it's not the simplest of concepts to understand, but that's how it is. And apparently, very few people actually understand how this works, but it does. So the qubits stay in a state of superposition until such time as they are actually measured. The impact of measuring a qubit in superposition is that it collapses. Its state collapses to one of the states, either 0 or 1. And it's that is determined by probability. So we start thinking about things in a very different way to how we deal with it in a macro kind of world. The third concept that is important is that of entanglement, right? So you can have multiple qubits that are in a state of entanglement, like entangled pairs, for example, and so on. The key thing about these is that the entangled pair, or actually it could be more than two, right? But let's just talk about pairs. They share the same state. So if they're in a state of superposition, and you've got two of these, and one of them collapses to become a 0, then the other one does that as well, regardless of where it is, right? The physical distance between them can be quite massive. In fact, there is no theoretical limit to how far apart they can be. So we exploit that as well in some of these quantum systems. Now, coming back to quantum computing, right? The intent of quantum computing is to use this concept of qubits, this new way of encoding information, in order to do some sort of computation, right? Now, it's important to understand why and how this could be more powerful than our classical computers. And I've got a little example here, right? So if you take your typical classical bit today, as I said, 0 or 1, very simple, right? That's how it works. So if you have a 4-bit word, right, 4 bits, then it can be encoded in different ways, right? It can take on 16 different values, 0 to 15. But at any point in time, it can only take on one value, one of these. It cannot be any more than one, of course, right? That doesn't make any sense. Now, if you look at this from a quantum perspective, the quantum bits are both 0 and 1 at the same time. They're in a state of superposition. So if you take a 4-bit or 4-qubit quantum word, that means that it can take on all 16 of those values at once. And then you can see that, hey, the power of it starts to emerge, right? That you do not really actually have to cycle through all of these values. It's existing, that all of these values exist at once. Now, if extrapolated to 10 bits, 100 bits, 1,000 bits, or qubits, I should say, you can see how powerful this can be, right? So quantum computers are all about exploiting that. Now, the threat that we have is that in the short or in the near or maybe the distant future, right? We don't really know. There could be a quantum computer that is powerful enough to break today's asymmetric algorithms. And I'll go into a bit more detail on that a little bit later, right? But the threat is that. And we call such a quantum computer a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, a CRQC. And there is a term to describe the day on which we'll have one of these. It's called Q-Day, right? So when that happens, then, hey, we're going to have a quantum computer powerful enough to break some of these algorithms. So what does that mean for us? Well, it means a lot, because pretty much all security on the internet uses some form of public key cryptography. So protocols like SSH, TLS, IPsec, all of them, digital signatures, they use public key cryptography. So if that breaks, we're in a world of trouble, right? But hey, no, Q-Day is not here yet. So maybe we're okay, maybe we're not. But there is a more immediate threat, and that is the whole concept of harvest now, decrypt later. So let me tell you what that is. So essentially, what I've got here is a TLS exchange, right? So in a TLS environment, first you're going to have a key exchange, then you have the authentication phase, and then the actual data encryption, right? Now, as most of you would know, the point of the key exchange is to come up with a key that we can use to then encrypt the data part of the TLS session, right? Which is the third phase here. And today it works brilliantly, but the threat and the belief is that there are bad players out there today who are actually harvesting this information. They are recording TLS sessions of communications which they believe to be of value, and they're storing it. And the idea is to store it until such time as a cryptographically relevant quantum computer exists. When it does, they replay the conversation, be able to decrypt that key exchange, get hold of the key, and decrypt the entire communication. That's the threat. So given that, right, I mean, how real is it? How close are we? Estimates vary. People have different conceptions of how long it's going to take for us to get a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, right? So some reckon it's 2-3 years away. Some reckon it's about 30 years away. Now, one thing I should clarify here is when we say a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, one of the measures here is a quantum computer that is capable of breaking the RSA algorithm using 2048-bit keys within 24 hours, right? That's what I mean. And a measure of the power of a quantum computer is the number of qubits it supports, okay? So we believe that at a certain point in time, it'll be able to support enough qubits, it'll be able to break these algorithms. But the point is no one really knows, right? What we actually do know is what we have today. So if you look at the quantum compute capability, that table there lists the top 10 most powerful quantum computers around. And you can see that they're pretty modest, right, in terms of the numbers of qubits You've got hundreds, maybe 1,000 qubits with IBM. There's an exception. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it uses a different technology called annealing, which is D-Wave. But it's generally pretty small. But at the same time, we've seen a lot of development of late within the quantum field. I mean, you've got Microsoft's Majorana chip that came out earlier in the year. Google's got a Willow a quantum compute chip as well. IBM reckons by 2033 we'll have quantum computers with thousands of qubits. So it's not that far away, right, you'd think. But there's also the recognition that, you know, if someone does come up with one of these quantum computers and it's a big state player, they will not be out there making a big song and dance about it, right? They'll hang on to it and crack everything they can. So we will probably not even find out about it until it's too late. So we've got to start taking some measures, right? Because we are sitting on a ticking time bomb here. And the industry has been working pretty hard at it. So having said all that, I'm just going to go back now and look at cryptography as we use it today and how quantum impacts it. So you can broadly categorize the algorithms we have into symmetric cryptography and asymmetric cryptography. Symmetric, very simple, right? Alice and Bob, they want to exchange some information securely. They come up with this key to encrypt data, and it's all very simple, right? Alice uses the key to encrypt the data. It becomes some sort of ciphertext, goes to Bob. Bob uses the same key to decrypt the data, right? This stuff works really, really well. We've been using for forever. The thing about symmetric cryptography is, and I'll just pull this out really quickly, is that if you use it in isolation, it doesn't scale, right? Because you've got to have some sort of way of exchanging the keys. And so the number of endpoints you have is actually fairly limited. On the plus side, the algorithms that we use for symmetric cryptography, things like AES, SHA-20, and so on, are actually very fast. We can do this in hardware. And so we use symmetric cryptography for bulk data encryption today. And it works really, really well. The challenge is, how do we get the keys out to the endpoints, right? How do you securely, firstly, generate a key, and secondly, distribute the key, right? That's a challenge we've been grappling with for symmetric cryptography for forever. Now, there's a few methods of doing it. One is pre-shared keys, right? Very simple. It's a manual, static thing. You come up with a key, you give it to someone trusted, they go to both ends, they type it in, right? Primitive as it sounds, it's still used, right? That mechanism is still used. An emerging way of doing this is called quantum key distribution. And I'll touch on that a little bit more later on. But this is a way of actually using quantum technology to distribute the keys. It's got nothing to do with quantum compute, by the way, right? Just another application of quantum technologies. But by far the most popular way of doing this is to use asymmetric cryptography. So we use public key infrastructure or communications to actually exchange the key that is subsequently used for symmetric cryptography, right? Okay, so how does quantum compute impact this? Now, with a symmetric cryptography environment, really there are many ways of breaking it, right? And typically we exploit the weaknesses of the systems at the endpoints. Now, if you had to actually decrypt the data, the intercepted data, it's pretty rudimentary, right? You have to do a brute force kind of attack. So we look at how quantum can actually speed up those brute force attacks. Now there's this chap called Love Grover, who in 1996 came up with this algorithm that uses quantum compute. So it's a quantum algorithm that can actually speed up brute force attacks. So it's actually it does a quadratic speed up of brute force. So whereas you would have to do an order n number of operations in order to brute force a certain size key, this reduces it to order square root of n, which is actually it doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a lot. So what does that mean for us, right? Are we a threat? Is symmetric cryptography a threat? Well, not really, because if you think about the impact of this, a square root of n speed up basically means that the efficacy of your keys is halved. So if you're using 128-bit key, and if you apply a quadratic speedup to the brute force, then it effectively becomes a 64-bit key. So how do we deal with this? Simple, you just double the key size, right? And then you're back to where we were. So with algorithms like AES-128, which is quite prominent out there, you move to AES-256, right? It doubles the key size, and you get effective protection equivalent to 128-bit keys. For hashing, like SHA-256, go to SHA-512. So essentially, what we're saying, symmetric cryptography, don't worry too much, it's fine, right? It's not going to be impacted massively by quantum compute. Then, okay, we look at public key cryptography. So, as you recall, the key challenge with that, no pun intended, is that of key distribution. Now, public key cryptography solves it in a very elegant way. You have a combination of public keys and private keys. The idea is you encrypt with the public key, decrypt with a private key. Or you could do it the other way as well. You could encrypt with a private key and decrypt with the public key, right? Public key is advertised to everyone, private key is kept secret. And so this is fantastic, right? So in this case here, this example, we show Alice and Bob having this exchange. There's a number of public key cryptography protocols. There's RSA, there's Diffie-Hellman, there's elliptic curve cryptography. They all work on similar sort of principles, public key, private key. These are algorithms that are incorporated into protocols like TLS and IPsec and so on. So a quick application, like I said, right, I'll build this out in the interest of time. The top one there, key exchange. So if Alice wants to distribute a key for symmetric cryptography to Bob, what she can do is she can wrap it around exchange that is based on public key cryptography. She encrypts the key with Bob's public key, sends it to Bob. Bob is the only one that can decrypt it because Bob got his own private key. It's secure, so she can be fairly certain that that whole exchange is secure and that symmetric key can be shared with Bob. The other application is around digital signing, right? So you can have a similar sort of thing there to ensure that Bob can validate that any messages it receives from Alice are really from Alice. So given this, right, this scales. Because it's dynamic, it can scale to a large number of endpoints. The challenge is that it cannot deal with very high traffic volumes because the sizes of the keys that we're dealing with here are way larger than symmetric key, right? So with AES, you've got 128-bit keys, you've got 256-bit keys. With RSA, you're looking at 2,000-bit keys. That's slow, so you don't want to use it for bulk data encryption. So you use the two together. So the magic, right? The magic here is how can we do this, right? How can you have this thing where you can encrypt with the public key and decrypt with the private key? And the reason we can do that is because we use this very neat mathematics that allows us to have this relationship between the two keys that is mathematically derived in such a way that that function works. You can encrypt with one, decrypt with the other. Now, these algorithms that are used in RSA, Diffie-Hellman, and so on are mathematical one-way algorithms. Basically, what that means is that you can perform the function in one direction, but it's extremely hard to reverse it. And the whole security of this is contingent on that your adversary does not have sufficient computing power to be able to decrypt this in a reasonable amount of time. It's not impossible, it's just those are the conditions. And we've been pretty happy with that so far, right? Until now, because that equation has changed a bit. So, I think I'll just speed ahead. We've already seen an example here. What impact does quantum have on this? Well, it turns out it has a lot of impact, right? So the algorithms, all of these algorithms, RSA and Diffie-Hellman and so on, they require the ability to factorize numbers. So large numbers, working out factors of large numbers. And in the last 2 millennia of the existence of mathematics, we haven't come up with efficient mathematical algorithms to factor numbers, as hard as it seems, right? There is nothing out there that can do it in quick time. So if you have really large numbers, working out the prime factors of these large numbers is a very mathematically intensive process. And we counted on that until now, until we have, quantum computers. So Peter Shaw, a mathematician, came up with a quantum algorithm to exploit the capabilities of quantum compute to really solve this problem, to work out or determine factors of large numbers really quickly. And that is bad news, right, for classical cryptography. That means that if we have that sufficiently powerful quantum computer, it'll be able to break all these algorithms. So we're faced with a problem here. Like, what do? Because we rely on it, right, for pretty much all our secure communications in the internet, for everything out there, really. So that's really kicked off this movement for a new set of mathematics that we are calling post-quantum cryptography, PQC, right? So that effort is all about building these new algorithms to deal with this problem. So what does a post-quantum future look like? Just a quick summary: symmetric key solutions, no real issues. You continue to use existing technology; it works well. You can increase the key sizes just to be safe. But recent work has shown that even if you don't increase the key sizes, some of these quadratic speed-up algorithms are not able to be implemented efficiently enough for you to, for the current key sizes to be compromised. So you don't even need to do that, but you could, right? Just to be sure. When it comes to asymmetric key cryptography, the solution really is to come up with this new mathematics like PQC. Now, quantum key distribution is something that actually transcends both of them, right? It gives you something that's quantum safe, but there are different reasons for using quantum key distribution, for those of you who've actually heard about this. So quantum key distribution, very briefly, is a method of providing key distribution that provides what we call enduring security. That is, it is not contingent on the computing power of an adversary, right? It relies on the properties of quantum mechanics. And it's actually quite a brilliant way of doing this. And the way it works, which I don't really have time to go into today, but happy to have a chat with you offline, is, it sends photons that are in a state of superposition. And, as I mentioned, if you observe any of these particles, they collapse, right, to a state of 0 or 1, which means that the endpoint will be able to detect that there has been some eavesdropping of the channel, which is really powerful. So, it is considered to be perfectly secure from that perspective, right? I mean, there could be issues with the implementation at either end, but in terms of the communication between the two parties, it's considered to be way secure than anything. So if you've got data that has a really long shelf life, defense data, health data, or something like that, then, this may be the way to go. It's got its challenges. It's expensive. It needs special hardware. It needs optical channels and so on. But there are certain military defense kind of applications where this may not be a bad solution. But coming back to PQC. So PQC, as I said, is about coming up with new algorithms, replacements for RSA, Diffie-Hellman, and so on. And the body that's taken it upon themselves to come up with this is NIST in the US. They actually kicked this process off in 2016. They invited applications for candidate algorithms for key exchange and for digital signatures, right? So last year in August, they finalized 3 of those. You can see those there, FIPS 203, 204, and 205. One of them is a key exchange mechanism. The other 2 are digital signatures. They've also come up with backups. So even they are not quite sure, right? Because, with these algorithms, you never know what it's going to take, right? I mean, it could be cracked tomorrow. In fact, not a lot, but a few of the algorithms that were shortlisted out of all the candidates that were received were cracked like within weeks of being publicized. So, there's always a danger with mathematical solutions that will have some technology that will be able to crack it. But for now, these look pretty good. They are safe from attacks from classical computers and safe from attacks from quantum computers, right? Now, these are just algorithms. They have to be incorporated into protocols. And there's been a lot of frantic work happening in the industry around the IETF and so on to bring all of this into the cipher suites that are part of things such as IPsec and TLS and so on. So the work is pretty advanced. And in fact, there are implementations out there already as well. And organizations like the 3GPP is looking at that for 6G. Maybe some time away, but it's already something that we're looking at. So the threat is real, guys, and there's a lot of the regulatory bodies and forums around the world are getting into the act. The World Economic Forum has set up a task force to look at that because commerce, right? Global commerce is underpinned by security. If that breaks, we have a real problem. There's all these governments as well, Singapore government and so on, Korea, that are setting up these quantum safe networks because they see the threat of that as well. So there's a degree of urgency out there. Now, if you are to assess where you stand, right? There's this interesting theorem called Mosca's theorem, right? There's a smart chap called Mosca. He came up with this thing and says, okay, you got three parameters here. X is the time you want to keep your system secure, right? Your data, what's the shelf life essentially of the data that you're exchanging on your network? Y is the time it'll take you to build that quantum safe migration plan and execute it and have a quantum safe network. Z is the time to build a large-scale quantum computer. Now, I think X and Y, you have some control over. Z, you have no idea, right? It could be tomorrow. It could be 10 years from now. But what he's saying is if X plus Y is greater than Z, start worrying because, you might run out of time. So we have to actually start thinking about what this means for us. The industry is moving forward, but the sheer number of endpoints in the global internet, CCTV cameras, IoT endpoints, and so on, means that we'll be coexisting with non-quantum safe technology for quite some time. But it's imperative for us to start looking at the things that we can control. So what's the way forward, right? As with most things, security, a defense in depth approach is really the way to think about this. And it's from a security perspective, you can actually break this down into two different tiers, right? There's the security we provide at the application layer, the dynamic security that is using X509 certificates, public key cryptography, and so on. It's high scale. It's all very dynamic and so on. Where we've been using classical cryptography, so that needs to move to post-quantum cryptography, right? All your browsers and so on have to be updated for that. Now, there's a lower layer, which is your network infrastructure layer, right? Where most of you network operators play, no doubt, is where you can provide an additional layer of security. This is the layer at which you can do things like QKD. You can do things like symmetric encryption. So having your data encrypted both at the application layer and the infrastructure layer as well. So if your application layer does not move to PQCs fast enough, you've still got some protection at the infrastructure layer, right? Because that layer, if it's based on symmetric cryptography, is still quantum safe. So yeah, I might wrap up there. I hope that's given you some sort of idea of what we're dealing with when it comes to quantum compute and the threat to classical cryptography. Happy to take any questions. Maybe.